Scuba diving reveals a vibrant underwater world, from colorful reefs and marine life to mysterious caves and shipwrecks. Yet the ocean's unpredictability and potential equipment failures can turn dives into deadly encounters. Here are 5 tragic tales of divers who faced the unforgiving nature of the deep and lost their lives. Russian-Israeli diver Yuri Lipsky had a lifelong dream: to capture the mesmerizing beauty of the Blue Hole Arch on video. This arch is the most enchanting feature of the Blue Hole, one of Africa's most renowned diving spots along Egypt's Red Sea coast. The allure of this underwater marvel drew him to take on the challenge, and he was determined to share its splendor with the world. In April 2000, Lipsky arrived in the country to fulfill his goal. Having just a weekend to spend, he immediately sought out an experienced diver who knew about the Blue Hole to accompany him on the dive. His search led him to Tarek Omar, a technical diver with several years of experience that had earned him the moniker the Elder Diver. Lipsky eagerly shared his ambitious plan to capture the Blue Hole Arch on video. However, Omar, upon hearing his intentions, was gravely concerned. He warned Lipsky that the dive was exceedingly difficult, far beyond the safety margin for someone with Lipsky's current experience level. Omar strongly advised against the dive, fearing the risks involved were too significant. However, those were different from the words Lipsky wanted to hear. He refused to be dissuaded and pressed further to convince Omar. Eventually, Omar gave in, but with a condition. He asked that Lipsky train with him for 2 weeks before diving to prepare him for the possible challenges that could arise. One would have thought Lipsky would jump on the offer, given that Omar was more familiar with the diving spot. This turned out not to be the case. Lipsky refused the offer and decided he would go on the dive without Omar to ensure that he did not spend more than the weekend he had initially planned for. The following day, he arrived at the location where he was to begin the dive. Armed with 80 kilograms of gear, he jumped into the water and started diving. His dive was supposed to take him through the entrance of the Blue Hole and then to the Arch, a 26-meter-long tunnel that extends from the Blue Hole to the expanse of the Red Sea. It was also expected that the dive would be completed within an hour. After several hours of Lipsky yet to resurface, a chilling realization that something had gone wrong settled among those aware that he had gone on a dive. By nightfall, the grim certainty of his death became apparent. Recovering the body was a dangerous mission. It was unknown at what depth Lipsky's body might be. Even if it was found, swimming back to the surface with a body was risky due to the added weight. Yet a diver volunteered for the descent. This brave diver managed to locate and retrieve Lipsky's body. Lipsky's helmet camera was also recovered at a depth of 115 meters. It should have been damaged or broken because it was designed to sustain only 75 meters. Shockingly, it was still intact and contained a recording of Lipsky's final moments on Earth. Around the 5-minute mark of the video, Lipsky could be seen struggling for breath and fiddling with his buoyancy control device, or BCD. In a desperate act, he ripped off his regulator, but his struggle continued as his breaths grew shallower until the video timed out. Even without the rest of the scene, it was clear that Lipsky had lost his life. Initial theories pointed towards drowning as the cause of Lipsky's death. However, further investigation, aided by the footage from the recovered camera, revealed a more complex story. It was determined that as Lipsky descended, he encountered a rapid descent rate. He then attempted to control his buoyancy with his BCD. Tragically, a malfunction in the BCD led to a further uncontrolled descent and a rise in nitrogen levels within his breathing gas. This combination induced disorientation and narcosis, ultimately impairing Lipsky's judgment and causing him to sink deeper into the Blue Hole, where he met his watery demise. Several preventable mistakes were made. Considering the camera's weight, a proper pre-dive weight check could have prevented the rapid descent. Verifying the BCD functionality beforehand was also crucial, as a working BCD would have aided in controlling the descent. Most importantly, technical divers typically utilize multiple trimix tanks for better decompression management for such a deep dive. Despite the warnings, Lipsky, determined to fulfill his dream, made the risky decision to use a single air tank, significantly increasing the peril of his dive. This choice added an additional layer of danger to an already challenging and hazardous endeavor. These critical misjudgments and an unexpected equipment malfunction created a perfect storm of lethal factors. Ultimately, this fatal combination of inadequate preparation and technical failure sealed Lipsky's tragic fate. transforming his dream dive into a deadly descent. During the 1994 Christmas break, Deon Dreyer, a young diver with roughly 200 dives logged over 2 years, received an enticing offer. Divers from the South African Cave Diving Association, SACDA, invited him to join their expedition at Bushman's Hole, a freshwater cave at the privately owned Mount Carmel Game Farm in South Africa. The planned descent was ambitious, targeting a depth of 492 feet. Deon was assigned a support diver role, which meant he would not have to dive the entire length. The 20-year-old was ecstatic about the invitation and eagerly began preparations for the Bushman's Hole expedition. He shared the news with his parents, explaining it as a prestigious opportunity to assist experienced cave divers in achieving the massive diving feat. However, his mother, Marie, a woman in her 50s, expressed strong reservations. She pleaded with Deon not to participate in the high-risk dive. Despite her concerns, Deon remained determined, and on the designated day, he set off to join the team. Before the primary dive, the team conducted a practice dive to test their equipment and fine-tune their dive plan. The descent went smoothly and within the predetermined time. However, disaster struck during the ascent. At 196 feet, Deon communicated generally with his buddy using hand signals. Yet upon the team reaching 164 feet and performing a head count, they realized Deon was nowhere to be found. The team leader, understandably confused, noticed another diver gesturing a throat-slashing motion in the dim light. In a split-second decision, he instinctively began a descent to find Deon. But as he went deeper, he spotted Deon's light source already over 100 feet below, fading rapidly. Recognizing the extreme danger of continuing, which meant increasing his decompression time, the team leader decided to stop his descent and return to the surface. As he would later write in the accident report, pursuing Deon at that depth would have been a suicide chase. 2 weeks after the tragedy, Deon's father, Theo, funded the use of a minor, remotely operated submarine from the De Beers Mining Company to retrieve the body of his son. The submersible located Deon's dive helmet on the vast floor of Bushman's Hole, but his body was not recovered. Accepting this harsh reality, he and Marie placed a memorial plaque on a rock wall above the entrance as a tribute to their son. At the time, the cause of Deon's death was undetermined. Many presumed that he had lost consciousness during the ascent due to either oxygen toxicity or hypercapnia, a condition caused by excessive carbon dioxide buildup from exertion at depth. 10 years after Deon's disappearance, a surprising twist of fate led to Deon's body being discovered. A diver, David Shaw, while doing an extraordinary dive, found Deon's body at 270 meters lying on his back on the cave floor. Due to his wetsuit's buoyancy, Deon's hands were flat and his arms floated. He also still had his mask in place, but the body part David saw had no flesh. David could not pry Deon's body from the silt at that instant. Deon's air tanks and the battery pack for his light were firmly embedded in the mud underneath him, and David did not have the tools to ease the process. He would return months later to attempt the rescue again with some colleagues, but succumbed to the same fate as Deon during the process. A third and final dive, initiated to recover part of the technical equipment, ultimately led to divers locating Deon and David's bodies floating close to the surface. Both bodies were then recovered and later retrieved by their respective families. David Shaw wasn't your average recreational diver. He craved the challenge of pushing the boundaries of depth, venturing where few had dared before. So, Shaw eagerly accepted when his diving buddy, Don Shirley, proposed an expedition to Bushman's Hole, a renowned deep cave system in South Africa. Shaw embarked on the historic dive in October 2004, reaching a staggering depth of 280 meters. This achievement shattered multiple records: deepest rebreather dive, deepest cave rebreather dive, deepest rebreather dive at altitude, and deepest line-assisted dive. However, this wasn't enough for David. Once he touched the bottom, he decided to explore, high on the euphoria of his accomplishments. During this brief exploration, he made a shocking discovery: the body of 20-year-old Deon Dreyer, a diver missing for nearly a decade. Driven by a sense of duty, Shaw attempted to recover Deon's body. He wrapped his arms around the remains and tried to lift them. However, his attempts proved futile. Deon's air tanks and light battery pack were seemingly cemented in the mud below, making the recovery process impossible. Knowing that spending more time would further increase the decompression time to rise to the surface, David decided to tie his cave reel to Dayan's tanks, ensuring the body could be located again. He then began his ascent, and upon reaching the surface, he promptly contacted Dayan's parents. He informed them of his discovery and sought permission to attempt another dive to recover the body. On January 80 of the following year, David returned to Bush Hole with Don and a team of other divers to perform the recovery expedition. They had spent months exchanging ideas with other expert divers, buying necessary equipment and mapping out a dive plan. At this point, they were confident that it could be done. Within 12 minutes of starting the dive, David reached the ocean floor and promptly located the line he had secured during his previous record-setting dive. Following the line, he soon found Dayan's remains. David planned to use a body bag to carefully secure the body after disconnecting it from the air tanks. However, an unexpected issue arose. As David tried to maneuver the bag over Dayan's leg, freed from the tanks, the body unexpectedly dislodged from the silt and floated free, complicating securing it in the bag. Instead of giving up on the recovery and resurfacing immediately, David persisted in attempting to pull the body bag over Dayan's remains. He realized this approach was impractical and manually dragged Dayan's body to the surface. Tragically, the additional minutes spent grappling with the body bag proved fatal. On the 20th minute of the dive, his breathing choked, and shortly after, David breathed his last. He would not be returning alive from his 333rd career dive. When David failed to resurface at the prearranged meeting time with Don around the 121-meter mark, it became tragically apparent that he had lost his life during the recovery effort. The cause was likely similar to what occurred to Dayan a decade earlier. Devastated, Don ascended alone, facing difficulties due to a faulty hammerhead controller, but ultimately surviving. Before the dive, a somber agreement had been made. No rescue mission would be attempted in the event of an accident. However, a twist of fate intervened, eliminating the need for such a risky endeavor. Days after the tragic incident, a team returned to Bushman's Hole to retrieve essential technical equipment left behind. During the process, they found David and Dayan's bodies floating close to the surface. The significant change in pressure and depth had taken a toll on David's body, which exhibited post-mortem rigidity in an upright position. On the other hand, Dayan's remains had undergone adipocere formation, which preserves tissues and can cause buoyancy when a body stays David's too long underwater. This unexpected situation and David's insistence on using the body bag were the reasons why the planned recovery failed. In the end, David received a cremation service as per his loved one's wishes. His ashes were then scattered in the grasslands near Bushman's Hole, a final resting place close to the site of his last dive. Fizal Kurban, Kazim Ali Jr., Rishi Nagasar, and Yusuf Henry worked as underwater welders for Land and Marine Contracting Services, LMCS. Their primary role was to be contacted by companies that required welding services at underwater oil drilling locations. On February 25, 2022, the four men arrived in Pointe-à-Pierre, a town on the western coast of Trinidad along the Gulf of Paria, home to the island's largest oil refinery. Paria Fuel Trading Company Limited had contracted their employer to perform routine maintenance. This task involved installing a riser on a 90-centimeter bore pipe that extended approximately 400 meters from the shore to an offshore berth. Initially, the task, being executed at a depth of 18 meters, progressed smoothly. However, as they neared the job completion, a safety valve that had allowed them to work on the pipe unexpectedly opened. This sudden action created a latent differential pressure that led to a powerful vacuum effect, causing the men to be sucked inside the pipe. An immediate rescue operation is typically expected to recover the divers. The urgency of initiating one should have increased when a fifth individual, who had been with the four divers, was rescued after crawling to the pipe entrance within 3 hours of the incident. He reported crucial information, stating that he had seen the other divers in an air pocket, though one was injured and unable to move. However, no immediate rescue operation was initiated as Paria Fuel Trading Company Limited refused to allow divers from LMCS, citing supposed health and safety issues. Meanwhile, the company assigned rescue divers would only enter the pipe if its contents had been pumped out. Several days passed before an attempt was finally made to rescue the trapped divers. Despite the lack of initial rescue efforts, there was some hope that air pockets might have enabled the divers to survive until a rescue could be made, even though the air quality was likely poor. Tragically, the delay proved fatal, and when the bodies of Faisal Kurban, Kazim Ali Jr., Rishi Nagasar, and Yusuf Henry were found, they had all died from drowning after the air they had utterly depleted. The incident prompted an investigation led by the Commission of Inquiry, COE. The final report deemed both Pariah and LMCS equally culpable for the disaster, highlighting that the methodology adopted by both companies for the oil pipeline task was flawed. The report also criticized Pariah's outright refusal to allow a rescue mission for the trapped divers, despite multiple offers to conduct one. As of now, the compensation situation for the 4 divers who tragically lost their lives remains unresolved. However, Pariah has stated in a recent press release that they are exploring all available options to support the families. Kenneth Lowry and his 14-year-old son Xander had traveled to Florida annually for their scuba diving trip since Xander was 8. The trip was a critical bonding moment for them, especially since Kenneth and Xander's mother were no longer together. On March 24, they returned to the city for their yearly tradition, even though Xander's mother had passed away 3 weeks earlier due to cancer. The dive location was a popular site called Captain Mike's near Juno Beach, situated on a picturesque barrier island just south of Jupiter and north of West Palm Beach on South Florida's east coast. To reach the site, Kenneth chartered the Republic 4 through the Jupiter Dive Center, which operates on the shores of Juno Beach. After an initial tour of the waters, Kenneth determined it was time for him and Xander to begin their dive. They entered the water and started descending, reaching the bottom quickly. However, just a few minutes later, Xander surfaced, shouting for help. He informed the crew that his father needed assistance and that he had last seen him lying on the seabed with his regulator out. It turned out that Kenneth and Xander had encountered some difficulties during the dive, and in a split-second decision, Kenneth pushed his son to ascend alone to seek help. The Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office and Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission officers were immediately alerted. Meanwhile, Xander received treatment for decompression illness, having ascended rapidly in his urgency to raise the alarm about his father's predicament underwater. The authorities promptly responded to the alert, and thanks to their coordinated efforts, Lowry was located within an hour of their arrival, albeit tragically already deceased. According to reports, Kenneth was a certified master diver and actively pursued certification as a dive instructor at the time of the incident. He leaves behind his parents, 2 siblings, 3 children, including Xander, and 5 grandchildren. Police investigations into the cause of his death are also still ongoing, with initial speculations pointing towards a possible equipment malfunction.